Welcome to self-discoverywisdom.com, formerly known as Self-Discovery Media. On these podcasts, you're going to hear people who speak from the heart. They've taken the journey in life. Many things have happened to them, but they've changed it to happening for them. And in their strength, their courage, they've discovered their abilities and their wisdom, and they are now sharing it here with you. Do enjoy each show. We bring it to you with love and knowing that it's going to help you on your journey of life. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of our Global Veterans, right here on selfdiscoverywisdom.com. I'm your host, Sarah Troy, and my guest is Peter Michael Johnson. We're going to be talking about his new book, White Cloud Free. What does that mean? Well, he talks about his experiences in Africa and Latin America and helped mature Peter understand the love. How did that come about? Well, he set his book mostly in Latin America, and it is a semi-autobiographical, hard to get my mouth around that word, tale of idealistic, naive Peace Corps volunteer who suffers a series of traumas abroad, leading to unlikely friendships. At 23, Peter enlisted in the Peace Corps and finds himself teaching bookkeeping in a tiny village in Paraguay. When a lynch mob comes in and kills several people in his local village after a disagreement over a harvest proceeds, Peter flees with his 12-year-old homeless friend in search of safety, taking him through an indigenous community, a Mennonite colony, a squatter's camp, and finally the lawless, chaotic city of the Ciudad del Este, where he meets a kind transgender sex worker. Nearly 2 days later, a midlife crisis compels this protagonist to return to Paraguay and find that friend who had helped save his life so many years before. Through this journey, Peter discovers some hard truths about himself, his faith, and the fluidity of memory. Quite a beginning there. Going to whether it's Peace Corps or whatever, I mean, there's so much trouble in the world. Peace, you may go in, you want to hold the peace, but you're going to find the turmoil. And you never quite know what you're up against, do you? Because we know for sure that when people are in fear or in anger, or live in the hate rhetoric, that there is no clarity of mind. All there is retaliation. And so how do you bring peace about to that? Welcome to the show, Peter.
Well, thank you. It's a delight to have to be here with you.
So why the Peace Corps for a start?
Well, I mean, I guess my reasons for joining the Peace Corps were quite different from the reasons I ended up staying and really got a lot out of the experience. I was 22 years old. I had just graduated from college, and I knew I didn't want a office job.
Mm,
I knew I didn't want to go work a 9 to 5. Um, I had this sneaking suspicion that I was meant for something greater. I had a higher calling, but I wasn't
mm,
sure what it was. And it seemed like the Peace Corps did pretty good stuff. I didn't really know too much about it. I was an English major, and I think the Peace Corps sent me a postcard at some point, and it said, "Would you be willing to do beekeeping?" I said, "Yeah, why not?" And so they immediately put me into that category of volunteer who's willing to check and say, "Why not?" And I became a beekeeper in rural Paraguay, teaching beekeeping to subsistence farmers for a little over 2 years. And it
wow.
was an amazing, really difficult, but wonderful experience that has really captivated my imagination since then.
Mm. It kind of really humbles you, when you're actually in the field, when you see how simply and honestly and humbly these people work, and very often against, the tyranny of what's going on around them. And it's, when you're coming from North America, where we think we don't have enough, and you go to places where, every single day is a struggle, it really resets your whole thought process, doesn't it?
Yeah, sure does. For me, there's almost no starker contrast than New York City to Tuna Cazapá, Paraguay, which is where I was located. And so, I didn't really have running water. There
Mm,
was power somewhat, but not really any modern conveniences. And when you say it was humbling, it certainly was. I thought I was bringing a lot to this community and I was going to be helping a lot,
Mm,
but I found I couldn't do the simple things. You know, I'd never
okay.
learned to wash my clothes by hand. I had
Right.
never learned to split firewood. You know, just the basic necessities of life. I had to relearn
Mm,
because, you know, water, I didn't know how to get good water from a well and not get sick from it and stuff like that. So those were things that I sort of had to learn from the natives. And what I found was that certainly in the beginning, and then as time went on, it almost felt like I was getting more from
yeah.
the indigenous people than I was giving to them, which
Mm.
was probably the big surprise and um, the big thing that humbled me when I was there.
And you can't undo that. It doesn't matter where you walk in life. You know, when you walk back into running water and all, you know, washing machines and all the luxuries of life, you know, I'm sure through those lenses you see life in a totally different way.
Yeah, you know, you sort of you certainly don't take them for granted
Mm,
quite as much. You know, I'm still uh, very close to a few people that I met there. I met one desperately poor subsistence farmer who had 4 kids, was about my age, no shoes,
mm.
not too many teeth in his head. And he was desperate enough, you know, I think they were all a little suspicious of me. Why is this,
Yeah.
you know, light-skinned guy from North America where we see TV, you know, it's really nice up there. Why would he come live with us? And they
Mm,
were sort of suspicious. And this guy was desperate enough to put aside his fears, and he came to me and he said, I really want to learn how to keep bees. Can you teach me something?
mm,
And he quickly became my best friend. And you know, we text each other, and you sort of strips away all the minutia, the mundane things of daily
yeah.
life, and it centers you on what's important in some
Hmm.
ways, especially being in touch with him and being in touch with each other. We get a lot out of our relationship. But I just, you know, now the smartphone revolution has come to Paraguay. Even rural subsistence farmers have a smartphone at this
Mm,
point and connection to the internet. So we're just on WhatsApp and we just send each other little words of encouragement, or if we're not feeling encouraged, we
mm.
commiserate together.
Yeah.
And you know, it's sort of like this is what it means to be human, is what it
Yes.
reminds me. You know,
Yes.
this is what it means to be a human being without all the trappings of culture that you
Mm,
might have inherited, or without all the trappings of modern technology. Sort of like this is core to who we are and what
mm.
is in our hearts, and and we're going to celebrate that together, and we're going to connect together on that level regularly. And I think for him, you know, he makes bricks for a living now. You know, there's been a drought for a few years in Paraguay, and he hasn't been able to produce any food. So he went across the border into Brazil and found a brick making sort of company. And he lives paycheck to paycheck, but
Yeah.
it's better than going hungry, right?
Yes.
And we just text each other. And it's, you know, I'm living in my cushy life here in Naples, Florida, and it's a way different life. But I never take it for granted. And I think part of it is being in touch with this fellow Felix, who's been very special to
You kind of, when you look at the title, Peace Corps,
me.
you
Hmm.
know, what is the core of peace, right? And that is connection, and it's connection from the very core, from the, you know, the very root of us. And it isn't the bells and the whistles. It is where you connect really from heart and soul.
That's
And that
right.
kind of connection is the biggest enrichment that you could ever find in life.
Yeah.
But you obviously didn't know that's what you were going for. Uh,
No.
you know, God,
Hmm.
the divine had a different plan for you, but you're there kind of peacefully teaching people how to, you know, be a beekeeper and kind of immerse yourself in their culture and learn more from them, perhaps than the other way. But what suddenly went wrong?
Well, for me, you know, the experience, my personal experience, I need to differentiate my
Mm,
personal experience from the novel itself.
yes.
So the novel, many of the traumatic things that happened in the novel did happen to me personally, but maybe not in the way that they
You've portrayed.
depicted in
Mm,
the novel, right? So I would say probably, you mentioned that there was a lynch mob. That was
mm,
maybe perhaps the most traumatic thing that had
mm,
happened to me while I was there. I was there for, I don't know, a few months, and the daily life in a rural village in Paraguay centers around crop cycles, right? And so there is a cycle for the main cash crop of my area, and that is cotton. A lot of
mhm,
people grow cotton, and it's the old way of growing cotton. Nothing's mechanized; it's
mm.
cotton by hand. They're picking it by hand, and if you've ever seen how that's done, it's really long, hard work. And then a man from the city would come with a train of diesel trucks and haggle with the farmers and try to get a good
As
deal
cheap as
on
possible.
the
Hmm.
cotton,
Hmm.
right? And that was their yearly income. They were subsistence farmers, so they had enough to eat because they were growing most of their food. But in the end, this is the main thing that they got their
Mm.
money for all year long. Well, a
Yeah.
lot of these farmers, and so the cotton harvest came. They sold their cotton. They were flush with cash, and
Ah.
about a week after the cotton harvest happened, a carnival came to town.
Mm.
And I'd been there just long enough to know that there was too much drinking going on at the
Uh-huh.
carnival.
Hmm.
And so I didn't go. And also, the men who were running it looked like a rough sort, you know.
Yeah. Questionable.
They they had guns tucked into their belts and
Hmm.
too much cane rum flowing
Yeah.
easily. They came with carnival music and a few kiddie rides, but really the main source of attraction was a roulette wheel, and
Ah.
they had this roulette wheel with three of the national soccer teams of Paraguay, the three
Mm.
most famous soccer teams. And so instead of like a roulette wheel we might be accustomed to that's red and black, this had three
Mm.
different possibilities. So you had a 1 in 3 chance of winning. So the farmers all promptly lost their money. I mean,
Yeah.
nobody won any in a 1 in 3 shot. You quickly lose that money. The odds just simply aren't in your favor. And so uh, it was over the course of 3 or 4 nights, I think, and they're blaring their music, and I'm trying to go to sleep, and I found this little hovel that I've tried to fix up in the center of town, and I'm can't get to sleep because they're blaring the music pretty close to me. And one night, I think I start hearing what I think are fireworks, and then I hear the screams, and I
Mm.
hear people I know screaming and like screaming for their parents to come let them in the house and stuff like that. And it's really chilling. And so, I'm not there that long, and I think to myself, okay, what do I do? I'm in my underwear. I'm like just woken up, like I wasn't sleeping, but I was in my bed, trying to
Right.
get to sleep. And so I'm like, turn on the lights, and I grab my machete because I got a machete, and I think, well, what am I going to do with a machete against somebody who's got a gun? And so
Yeah.
I turn off the lights, and I'm like, well, maybe they won't think that I'm here. And then I think, well, what if they take refuge in my house? Because I don't know, 50 or 100 kilometers away, or not kilometers, feet away
Mm.
from the carnival. And so I go, okay, I guess I'll sneak outside. So I sneak outside, and I got my machete in my hand, and I'm in my boxers, and I just sit in the bushes for, I don't know, till there's not the gunfire and screams anymore. And it probably wasn't that long, but it seemed like a really long time because
Hmm.
I didn't know what was going on, and I was really scared. And I ended up crawling to a friend's house, and the rest of the story is even more chilling. And of course, I was unaware of what happened the rest of the story. I had to like sort of find out afterwards, and this is fairly similar to what's reflected in the novel. That night, I guess the carnival workers had shot a couple of the guys who were shooting at them, but they had
Mm.
actually hit them, and they ended up shooting and injuring a couple members of a big family in the area,
Hmm.
and those people got shot, were rushed to the hospital in the city, which is like, 50 kilometers away. And so uh, that night, that family comes together and in mass confronts, there's one police station in this village of 400 people, and there are two cops assigned to my
Oh,
village.
guess what chance
And
they
they
have?
come to the police headquarters building, which is just a tiny little
Mm.
shack in the middle of town. They say, "Give us the carnival workers." The carnival workers at this point have taken shelter in the police station because they know they're in
Yeah.
trouble.
Uh-huh.
They're out and about. And I guess the police are negotiating, and at some point, a couple of the members of the family sneak behind the house and shoot one of the carnival workers in the head. And big drama. You had, the equivalent of the district attorney of the zone coming in, the director of my Peace Corps, the
Mhm.
agriculture sector, the Peace Corps came out from the Capitol, which is, 9 hours away, made headlines in all the national papers. It was a harrowing and scary deal. I didn't end up leaving the site, and I guess they determined I wasn't at risk. I don't
Mhm.
I don't know how they worked that out in their minds, but
It was targeted, right?
yeah, it was
I mean, it was
yeah,
them against
they
the
weren't against
carnival
me.
workers. Hmm.
Right. It wasn't
Hmm.
against me. And so, you know, it, that story is sort of reflected in there. And then there are a lot of other stories. There are stories of, like you said, Mennonite colony and indigenous folks and squatters camps. And I've had experience with all of those. And then, in fact, the cities are full of sex workers and
Yeah,
some transgender sex
right.
workers. And it's a tough place to be when you're in a really poor and corrupt country and you want to escape that as somebody who's trapped in these cycles of poverty, and seeing it through the eyes of people I really cared about
Hmm.
was something that um, really stayed with me. And I've basically been writing about it ever since. I've been trying to write about
Hmm.
this, what it is, finding meaning in what I'd been through, because it was painful and difficult, and some of it was really joyful, and there was the joy of connection and the joy of ongoing relationship and the joy of maybe some folks escaped some of the crushing poverty, but
Very few, right?
both.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And where do they go? Because if they manage to make it to America, then it's a whole different thing against them. The
Hmm.
not blue-eyed and white, so it's a
Yeah.
totally different target, and really all people want is a chance to grow, a chance to achieve something in life, not live from paycheck to paycheck, not worry about the seasons or the weather changing or people coming in and taking their money. Just everybody just wants to have that right at life. And if
Right.
if if some people want to travel or some people want to be able to have a lot of kids and provide for them. It's just everybody wants that, but it always seems to be that there's always the handful that are the ultra rich at the expense of the ultra poor. And
Hmm.
the only way they're going to keep rich is by keeping them poor. So
Hmm.
that equality, of evening out is not in their interest. And when it's not in their interest, they're going to do everything they can to suppress. And it's
Yeah.
sad to see.
Yeah, for sure. In these countries that are very corrupt, that is the
Mm.
case. I mean, it is an unfair playing field
Hmm.
for sure. There are unfair things in the States, but
Hmm.
there's much more opportunity, much more equity in the
Yeah.
States than there are in some of these countries where, you bribe an official and you effectively have a monopoly on whatever sector
Yeah.
of the economy you want to have, right? And so Paraguay is one of the most corrupt countries in Latin America. So you've got, I think some estimates are 80 to 90% of the economy is black market
Yeah.
because it's so corrupt. They don't even bother to deal with officials. And there's a
Yeah.
lot of pirating of goods. And that's where Ciudad del Este comes in. Ciudad del Este is in the tri-border area of Brazil, Argentina, and Paraguay. And it's fascinating. You go there and you see the Puente de Amistad. It's ironically named, the Friendship Bridge from
Mm,
Paraguay to Brazil. And there's a sea, a line. It almost looks like a line of ants
mhm.
marching down the banks of to the river where they meet boats, marching up the bank. So they don't go over the bridge, the official bridge. And this is right under the nose of a Brazilian and Paraguayan
Mm.
officials, huge packages over their heads. These
Right.
people work as sacoleros. They're basically, smugglers, and it's all pirated goods. It's all, fake branded goods that are making their way. And who knows? I'm sure there's drugs and guns and all
Yeah,
sorts
you
of
name it.
terrible stuff
Yeah.
that's going
Well,
through
there's
there.
no, as you said, there's no checking the parcel up on the bridge. I don't know what's going on under the bridge. I don't see nothing.
Right,
Right. So,
right,
and he wouldn't be
exactly,
saying that, and he would not be seeing that if the hand hadn't been greased. So,
right.
yeah.
Hmm. That's right.
Um, I lived in South Africa for many years, and my nephew has just had to leave South Africa purely from the basis of 2 to 3 hours a day of electricity. And
Oh,
that comes about
yeah.
from since apartheid and the government being taken over, corruption, because that's what they knew and that's what they continue to do. There has
Right.
been no updating of infrastructure
Hmm.
at all in over 20 years. And so many hands have been greased that literally there is no power now. And the
Hmm.
country is just kind of going back into the dark age. And which, of course, what does that do? It breeds violence. And
Yeah.
when you see the violence, you see even more the bribing because money talks. And this is where money has the power,
Yeah.
right? When the people don't have, which need,
Hmm.
and the people that
Yep.
do have, that's it's a pity that we can't look at the bank account of a person's heart and soul as
Right.
being the true e-commerce.
Yeah.
But it's all about, the green stuff. And um, quite honestly, when that's in power, everything everything
Mhm.
unravels. Everything,
We
and
want,
so many
yeah.
people suffer.
I think we've learned, at least in the United States, over the last generation, that um, we want people to be free. We want countries to be free, but we need a sort of moral ecology where the people are
Mm,
worthy of the freedom that we
yeah,
give them.
yeah,
We've seen plenty of transitions of power where it seems like the people are more free. And this is true in Paraguay. Paraguay is a perfect example. There was a long-standing dictator. He had the second longest rule in Latin American history, Alfredo Stroessner, a half German megalomaniac who pushed people out of airplanes, did a bunch of terrible stuff, ruled with an iron fist from, I want to say the 50s until 1989. So a long time. And when I was there post Stroessner. I was there a good 10 years after Stroessner had been deposed. And, you know, people longed for Stroessner days. And I didn't blame them. I saw it firsthand because
yeah.
there was no security. The corruption was so bad. They
Hmm.
just, even though Stroessner ruled with an iron fist and they weren't as free, they wanted the security.
Yeah.
That's why, and you see that, I think that's true in Iran or Afghanistan.
Hmm.
You wonder who wants the Taliban in power? Well, it's
Right.
people who are tired
A
of the
month later,
chaos.
the Taliban are right back in there, and the 20 years has been completely undone. Right.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it's people who are saying the chaos is too much. It's too dangerous. It's not fair. And yeah, they rule with an iron fist, but I'll tell you what, you can leave your doors unlocked. And that's what I heard a lot in Paraguay.
Yeah.
I would talk to people about Stroessner and I thought I knew, I'd gone to NYU. I knew what modern democracy looked like. And I would talk to people about the Stroessner days and expect to hear, oh yeah, he was terrible and he pushed people out of airplanes and he had a secret police. And all I heard from the rural Paraguayans who were subsistence farmers was how good life was then. He had built these hydroelectric dams along the rivers and sold electricity and used those subsidies to build infrastructure in the country. That was the most help that they had ever gotten from the government. After he left power, they didn't get anything. It was
Exactly.
all corruption. It was all sucked up into the rich families of the country and privatized. And so,
Look at Brazil. I mean, he's selling the Amazon.
Oh,
which
absolutely.
which is the,
Yeah.
the core ecoculture of the world.
Mm.
It not only holds the most cures for everything, but it is needed to keep the balance ecologically of the world. And he's selling it off because, of course, there's money in it. And look at how many people are leaving, Brazil because they simply can't get food, they can't get anything because it's just gone so
Right.
utterly extreme. And this is,
Right.
this is the imbalance of life, right? Where you were working, hand in hand with people teaching them how to beekeep and just watching, the humbleness of every day getting out there and working, there was an honest living to it. And they
Mhm.
felt pride in what they did. And with what little they had, they shared. And the importance wasn't what they had, it's the fact that they had each other.
Mhm.
All right. Again, that's where the
Yeah.
commerce was, the each other. They knew the value of each other. When people don't have value in themselves or value for anyone else, money and power steps in and becomes the
Right.
value they seek, right? Which is a
Yeah.
false solution. It doesn't matter how big they are or how rich they are, they will
Yeah.
crumble and fall at some point. Case in
Mhm.
point, the carnival workers. How many people
Yeah.
have they conned for so long,
Right. Right.
right?
A perfect example of that was my buddy Felix. You know, I had built a relationship at this point with him, and I had been out on his farm. We had gone out in the jungles and captured colonies of bees, and he had his whole little beekeeping enterprise going, and it was wonderful. And he was my best friend at this point. And I finally worked up the courage to talk to him about family planning, right? Because
Mm.
I see him having all these kids, and he's so poor. I
Uh-huh.
think, and I even go, I get in the Peace Corps library. I go to the Peace Corps library. I'm not trained to talk about family planning with a with a subsistence farmer. I'm a beekeeper. I don't know how to have this conversation, but they have an illustrated book, that I can use. I can sort of help him understand family planning. You know, forget it. Nobody's given him family planning. I mean, he went to a neighboring village and like found his wife and like married her at 16. Like it
Uh-huh.
was it was like nobody had any birds and bees talk with him. Plus, his dad had died when he was very young, so he had had a hard life, and so I finally work up the courage to have this discussion with him, and I go, you know, it's just basic economics, Felix. Like you're going to have more kids, and they're going to be more expensive, and it was just totally counterintuitive to him. To him, he was like, "Your kids are a blessing. We are a blessing to each other. That's what
Yes.
we are. Every child is a blessing."
Mhm.
And I had never thought about it that way because the West sort of teaches you the expense side, not the potential
Yes.
side of
Yes.
every child that you
Yes.
have. And it was just I mean, he was open to listening. I mean, he even said, "Well, I had no idea you could control the number of kids you have."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh my God,
Yeah,
how do you not know
exactly.
this? You've had four already. Like, come on, man."
Where did they come from?
Um, right, exactly. And so, but it really, again, it was one of these times where he saw my perspective and he was like, "Well, that's not quite how I look at it." And then I saw it from his perspective and I thought, maybe the West has it wrong. Maybe kids should be seen for their potential. Maybe
Yes.
they shouldn't be seen for their expense, you
Yeah.
know?
Yes.
And
Back to
I'm
the
saying that
dollar
within
sign again.
reason. I'm
Yeah.
saying that within reason,
Yeah.
I'm not saying everyone should have, 20 kids or anything, but um, I think we could use in the West a little more looking at people for their potential rather than their cost.
Yeah. I had a friend who had 9 kids.
Mhm.
And when you would take those kids out, they were just so tight with each other. No, it wasn't
Yeah.
just a question of the older looking after the younger. They were tight with each other in everything that they did.
Hmm.
And it is, just how Facebook comes up with memories, and it came up with a memory I post every time it comes up, and it's about a flock of sterling flying together in formation, making beautiful shapes, going at incredible speeds, but close together. Well, that was an
Hmm.
individual choice to be a part of the collective, to be
Yeah.
in sync with each other in order to fly together. And I think when
Hmm.
you have big families, that same succinctness is there, the attachment
Yeah.
is there, It isn't about the material. It is about,
Mhm.
again, back to the value of heart, of spirit, of soul, and
Right.
how they will fly together in any formation. Now and again, you have one that is a free spirit that needs to break away,
Mhm.
and they go off on their own journey. But it is that collectiveness that I think that in the West we miss a lot of. I
Right.
had three kids. Um, my daughter just has two. My other two kids have none. So,
Yeah.
it's that generation of not having any. But it's when you look at what a child gives you, and it is
Right.
unconditional love and joy and
Hmm.
wonderment, and we start looking at life through their eyes, I think we see life totally differently. But yeah, in the West, we've been conditioned. How much money do you make? What's your house you live in? What do you drive? How do you
Right.
dress? Who are your friends? And that has become your value. And this is why we have
Right.
so many empty souls.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think you struck the nail on the head. When I went into the Peace Corps, uh, I might not have said I didn't believe in human souls, but I
Mm,
probably would have not had any definition for it or
right.
any use for the definition, you
Mm,
know? So effectively, I didn't believe in it. And it's certainly not in the way Felix did. And I think when I left the Peace Corps, I certainly cared about my soul. I cared about being connected to a higher power. I cared about faith. I cared about intuition in a way that my sort of radical materialist
mm.
academic NYU graduate self
Didn't
has sort
relate
of
to.
been schooled out. It's been
Yes.
schooled out of me. You know, if I
Yeah.
had anything, maybe some of the more eccentric flourishes of the literature I read, maybe I saw glimmers of that, but I didn't have any.
Yeah.
I knew how to write a paper about it. I certainly didn't have any personal experience of
Yes.
it. And by the time I left, I did deeply care about my soul, and I cared about the souls of others, and I, like you, it fundamentally changed
Mm,
my my perspective on family. I really I got married quick after leaving the Peace Corps, and I
had a
promptly had
dozen kids
I
yourself.
know
No.
I know I now have three kids. I don't have Felix's 11 kids now,
Oh
but
my God.
yeah, exactly. But I certainly is, you know, the greatest blessing of my life is having those deep
Yes.
relationships, whether it's with Felix or my wife or my children, um, and really being able to nurture those relationships and and connect on a deeper, less material level.
Yes. I mean, let's face it, money is important. It puts the roof over the head and food in the stomach and other necessities that we need to live. And when you see such extreme poverty where a little extra money would make such a difference to the quality of their life. But
Right.
we know that when it's a lot of extra money, suddenly it distorts the life
Oh, absolutely.
because now it's all about, how many people have I interviewed that were the six, seven figure earners, and then Cosmic 2x4 came along and bottomed them out one way or the other through disease, this loss, whatever. And they had to kind of regrow, rebirth from the ground
Yeah.
up. And they then stepped into something that had meaningful purpose. And
Right.
that meaningful purpose gave them more in life than they had ever known before. And
Yeah.
that where they truly understood the commerce of life was doing something that you love, that comes from
Hmm.
the heart and the soul and the spirit when it's of service to other people. And that yes, money is good, but they look at money as a tool and
Yeah.
not as the be all end all value,
Hmm.
which we
It's
really
a
need to change that thinking because that thinking is what's destroying us.
Yeah, it's a sort of it's the difference between, like you said, seeing money as a tool and seeing money as an idol. Unfortunately, I think we're created in such a way that if we choose not to worship a higher power, we're going to end up worshiping something. I don't know too many people who don't worship something, and that something else can often become an idol. And that, whether it's money or power or even freedom, in the West, We seem to treat freedom like an idol, and you know, in my experience, um, freedom to do what you ought is much more important than freedom to do what you want, because what you want isn't always, you're not always,
What you need.
um is not always the best,
No.
we've got fickle feelings. Our feelings are
Oh
pretty
yeah.
fickle, and
Yes.
knowing what's good is a difficult thing. It seems readily apparent what good is, and to do good, like you said, a little bit of good with a little bit of money is good, but you think throwing a lot of money at it will just do better, but it doesn't
No.
end up translating that way.
No.
It
No.
In a lot of cases it exacerbates the problem or fosters dependency, or there are a million stories I could tell you about good intentions,
Hmm.
disconnected from sound economics, and ending up hurting the very people you want to help. You know.
And I think it's you don't throw money after something like just giving them money. It's like put money in an infrastructure that gives them security. Right. There's a gentleman that I interviewed that went out. I can't remember the name of the country now, but his wife was from there. So he decided to go and look. And it was a storm that kind of blew them onto this particular part of the island, part of the country. And they ended up in a monastery looking for shelter where they had taken in numerous children because it was to do with the war. I'm afraid I
Mhm.
can't remember there's so many wars around in the world, so I can't remember which one it was. But
Mhm.
people, they were either orphans or people were sending their children to the monastery
Sure.
for shelter, and they couldn't believe that they had nothing, well
Right.
water, nothing. And so they actually started an organization where the water was so pure that they would bottle the water and sell it to raise money. And then they
Mhm.
had volunteers and companies invest in education for the kids. So they got them satellite dish with Wi-Fi, they got them computers, they got them education, and they gave them
Mhm.
some, and they also gave them something else what they could generate as an income in order to sustain this
Yeah.
orphanage monastery. And you see, that gives them dignity, gives them a sense of value, a sense of purpose, but a skill and a tool that they can take anywhere in life. And I think
Right.
that's the importance. It's not just about throwing money in something, it's about building something that can create the jobs or create the education for the better jobs
Absolutely.
that can bring about stability to the family. And in North
Yeah.
America, I have a book coming out with an anthology of people with a Forgotten Children series of how, in the way of we're raising our children, is breeding dysfunctional adults, and how we take children away from their families, put them in foster care where they're abused, instead of helping the families with
Yeah.
counsel, with proper either education or shelter or jobs,
Hmm.
trying to get to the core and the root of the problem instead of the
Right.
constant band-aid. And so the whole shift needs to happen. And
Yeah.
extreme poverty needs to stop. But what we need to do is give them the respect and the dignity of investing
Hmm.
in their countries, their cultures, their cities, their villages, their
Absolutely.
towns, so that they can create for themselves.
Yeah. The you're you're really succinctly summarizing the great Rabbi Maimonides, who has this. It's called Maimonides' ladder. If you've never heard of it, I
Mm.
encourage you to look it up. But it's a ladder of the types of charity people can give. Maimonides' ladder, and the lowest level is a reluctant heart of a donor, and a sort of resentful heart of a recipient, and they know
Yeah.
each other, and sort of that's. But the highest level, which is what you were getting at, the highest level of charity is he brings up, and this is a medieval scholar. This is amazing that
Mm.
he thought of this. A medieval Jewish scholar. He said the highest level of charity is when you create a context for
Hmm.
the recipient by which they can get out of the situation, the poverty situation, or the
Yes.
situation themselves,
Yeah.
create a job, create a community with a safety net, where you, as the creator of this context, business, community, you as the creator of this, have no idea who the recipient is.
Yeah.
So a big part of what he's focusing on is sort of this idea that a lot of people give because they want the feeling
Yeah.
feeling
Oh,
good, and
oh
that
no,
they
I
want to
give
see
my
the poor
conscience is
person.
clear. Yes, right.
Yeah.
What
And
do you
he's
give
sort
of
of saying,
yourself?
he's saying the most virtuous type of giving is when you don't even know who the recipient is, but you're
Yeah.
creating a context by which you are helping people
Yes.
and and of their own agency are helping themselves.
Yes.
And that is, I mean,
Respecting
that's really,
dignity.
it's really hard to do, right? How to dignify the recipient rather
Yes.
than making them an object of your pity.
You're
You're
right.
sort
And
of
making them feel small and insignificant. Yeah. Yeah.
you're sort of creating a context by which they could become the subject of their own story of development and their own agency. And that's what dignifies them is when they do it themselves, right?
Yes. And you know, the thing is that when we look at people as the wealth, they themselves are the wealth in their skills or in their gifts, in who they are and what they share and what they're capable of doing, then
Right.
why are we not supporting that financially in a way that they can keep sharing their gift to benefit others while sustaining themselves? You know, I think one of the I'm very big on heart and soul, as you may have noticed, because it's been mentioned all the way through. One of the big problems is we have troubled, broken hearts. They're jaded, they don't trust anymore. Um,
Yeah,
Everybody's seeking kind of love and
absolutely.
validation or something that's meaningful, but you know, we don't quite trust it because there's so much corruption and con and distrust out there. And the thing is that in our own vulnerability of opening up our heart from the truth from the inside out, allowing that consciousness, that beautiful universal wisdom and consciousness to come through us, it resonates in our heart in truth. So our heart is open in that truth. It's given to our
Right.
spirit to get into action. And our mind is very, very clear in what it needs to know and what it needs to do in that moment.
Hmm.
But we're so bombarded with the exterior that we're not hearing
Right.
the interior of us. And when you look at people that are on the poverty line, it is about putting the food on the table. It is about that laughter of the family around the table, the joy that
Hmm.
they have found within each other. Who's rich? The people poor at the table who are grateful for every crumb and each other, or the people with $1 million in the bank and they're not at the table because they're rushing off to this event, that event, this event, and there's no connection with their family whatsoever.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I think when we started this conversation, I don't know how we got right to the nub of it, but it's really seeing people, and my wife is a sort of an educator. That's
Mhm.
her calling. Like she is
Yeah.
just amazing at it. She's been in education pretty much her whole life and career. And the reason she's so gifted at teaching students is because she sees them for their potential, not
Yes.
their deficits, which is really counterintuitive because we in the West have learned teacher knowledge knows things is giving the kids who don't know things who have the deficits,
Yeah.
is sort of teaching them. But
Yeah.
really, it's about a relationship. It's about the teacher learning from the students and the students learning from the
Yes.
teacher, and it's a
Yes. Yes.
reciprocity that happens. Sort of shakes up all hierarchies, but
Yeah.
that's where the magic happens, where it's no longer a transactional
It's a
relationship,
relationship.
which,
Yeah. Yeah.
well, it's a
Yeah.
transformational one where
Yes.
both
100%.
parties
Mm.
are being transformed rather than engaging in some sort of transaction, because that transaction necessarily limits the
Yeah.
potential of that what that relationship could yield.
Oh God, you really hit a chord here with me now because uh I ran into this not only in myself because I had learning disabilities and that were just considered, quite honestly, back in those days, dumb. Right,
Mhm.
never will amount to
Right.
anything because I'm
Sure.
uneducated. I left school early, and it's because I had learning disabilities that nobody knew about in those days, and I
Sure.
couldn't learn the way they taught. But I could
Mhm.
sit down with a teacher and have hours of conversation and philosophy and everything else, where they would see an
Right.
intellect in me that was beyond the books. But
Right.
the books I couldn't relate to, right? I couldn't learn
Hmm.
now turn to page such and such because I couldn't relate to it. Nowadays, um, I've spoken to so many people who have autism or children with autism, and we're looking at a brilliance in our autistic children or autistic people, where they are so utterly focused in on what they're capable of doing, and what they are is very, very selective of who's around them. So it isn't
Right.
about the fame, the glory, the money. It's about what they're capable of doing and the passion and the focus for
Mhm.
that. And if it we're seeing more and more of autistic people on the spectrum out there, because I think, in all honesty, that's the way we need to go. We're so busy trying to be everything to everyone, we're being nothing to no one, including ourselves.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think seeing outside of traditional uh, paths for learning, traditional paths for what is a strength and what is a deficit is really important. I think that's important for cross-cultural understanding, like some American who goes to Paraguay, but it's the same for a teacher with a class full of students. I
Yes.
mean, what you need to do is you need to think about how the relationships that you're building in
Mm,
whatever context you're in are bringing strengths into the context of your relationship. So you need to be thinking, it may not seem like it, and that's really what my novel's all about. Is like you see these desperately poor people that are in the village, and you build these relationships, and you think that they have nothing, and they only want just a little bit of your economic understanding or your trades
yeah.
understanding or your worldview understanding. And the truth is, they're bringing a lot of wisdom, a lot of
Yes.
inherited wisdom from
Yes.
their ancestors, their community, their experience. I mean, just
Their
their
connection to earth and
experience,
spirit as well. Yes.
right? It's like my one of my favorite writers is Flannery O'Connor, and she wrote something along. I'm going to butcher the quote, but it's something like, "If you can survive childhood, you have enough fodder for the rest of your
Yes.
writing career." And the truth is, your experience, whether you have a terrible experience like a 12-year-old semi-homeless kid like that I met while I was in the
Mhm.
Peace Corps, or you're a well-to-do, suburban kid from the United States, both of them bring a wealth of experience that are strengths to whatever context of relationship that they're in. And so, and seeing those and being able to identify those, I think are really important to ensure that you're not limiting those
Right.
relationships.
Trevor Noah, one of my favorites, because I just love his deep, he's a comedian, but like when he's one of
Sure.
the most balanced people in thought
Hmm.
that you can listen to. And he was being interviewed by Jay Shetty, and he was talking
Hmm.
about experience. And he said, you may not enjoy the experience of life, but the benefits of who you become is what you do
Right.
enjoy. So sometimes we get very rough journeys and we're going through very rough experiences. It's who we choose to become because of it. What have we
Right.
learned from it? Where's our strength, our courage, our abilities? How do we
Mhm.
decide to feed those possibilities instead of give in to the trauma? And that
Right.
is all a choice. And those that choose to go through it and come out at the other end, their depth of knowledge and understanding and stepped into
Mhm.
meaningful purpose is something they would never ever get in an education. It had to be a life
Right.
experience.
Absolutely. Yeah, one of my other favorite writers is Viktor Frankl, as you probably know, and he's got this famous book, Man's Search for Meaning, and he was a Holocaust survivor, and I nobody wishes a Holocaust survivor's tale on anybody, but his broader point was, even in the depths of despair, the human person, we are built in such a way to derive meaning from our
Mm.
experience. And that meaning
Yes.
is what's so important in life,
Mhm.
is that meaning that we derive from it. It's what makes us human, what separates us from, some of the lower creatures of our world.
Right.
Like we are we are given some gift,
We are,
I mean, I,
whatever you want to
to
call
be able
it.
right, however you want to call it, to be able to derive meaning from even these terrible, terrible
Yes.
circumstances. And on the reverse, you may not wish, terribleness on anybody, but somebody's at a maybe pretty good life and pretty sheltered life. one of my favorite things about fiction in general is it takes the mundane
Yes.
and makes it wonderful,
Yeah.
makes it like full of wonder,
Yes,
literally
yes,
full of
yes.
wonder, so that you can look at your life in such a way that, one thing that I have in my novel that I love is that, I talk about campy Latin American soap opera,
Hmm.
and I derive
Yes.
a bunch of meaning from that deeper meaning. And nobody's
Uh,
looking at this soap opera that I'm talking about is Pedro el Escamoso, which is like a ridiculous, it's about this Colombian Lothario that's like going around Latin America, has a silly dance. People still joke about it. It
mhm.
was 20 years ago that was on TV. And that's what I'm talking about. Taking something even from pop culture, sort of campy,
Yeah.
kind of ridiculous, and finding a deeper meaning in it, and finding a way to connect with other human beings on a deeper level, I think is what makes our sheltered, maybe somewhat boring life amazing.
Well, it
And
helps
I
us
think the
look at
same
life
is
from a
true.
different point of view,
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Maybe
Yeah.
campy, maybe this and that. It's like when you read a book and you question yourself afterwards, what would I do in that situation? Could I do that? Could I have done that? Gosh,
Hmm.
I feel I'm the hero of this story, and that's the thing is when you can have a conversation with self after putting a book down, then I feel it's one that's really fed you. When you've watched a good movie, when you've watched a TV show that may be just stupid and you've laughed, but at the end of it, you go, there was a real point to that. As silly as it
Right.
was, there was a real point to that. And we're
Hmm.
so busy looking for the meaning of life elsewhere, we're not paying attention to it really being right at our fingertips, be it on the internet, through podcasting, TED Talks, books, movies, shows, experience of life. If we
Right.
stop chasing it on the outside and look at all
Hmm.
these things as feeding us, as being a lesson
Right.
learned through the experience of others, that's what my
Hmm.
podcast's all about. You're sharing your experiences, your journey, and how it
Yes.
changed you. People listening to it and go, I may have not gone to Paraguay, but I did this, and yes, it changed me. Or I'm thinking of doing something. I need a change in my life. And maybe I
Right.
do need to go to the other extreme to reset myself, to truly
Hmm.
understand what life means to me. We have no idea what our stories are going to do or how they're going to
Right.
inspire people. But that's the whole beauty of storytelling. Back to the beautiful word that you said, wonderment.
Hmm.
Staying in
Yes.
wonder, because that's the excitement of life. I wonder what's around the corner.
Hmm. Yeah, something I learned later, and it's been later in my life as I've moved along and I've gotten more contemplative about my life and started listening more to my life. Is the trick is to be present in
Yes,
those moments,
yes.
to be truly present. And a lot of modern life, you're thinking about the future or the past. I don't know why we're constantly slaves to our
Conditioned
calendars
that way. Yes.
or
Mm,
regrets,
right.
or maybe not even regrets. It could be triumphs, but you're sort of living in the past or the future. And in order to really reap the benefits of finding that wonderment in that moment, in that stupid TV show, or in the dumb question from your neighbor, or in the silly way your pet is acting,
Yes,
is to be truly present in that moment. And that's
yes.
that's harder than it seems, I
I
guess, in
know.
America.
Yes,
It's not so hard when you're struggling in poverty, because every moment is about
it,
struggling for survival and you're
yes,
in the moment.
yes.
Um, but as we've gotten more comfortable and
Mm,
richer in this
we become
society,
complacent.
I think we've gotten out of the moment, a
Yeah,
lot of us.
yeah.
And for me, I've had to go into sort of more contemplative prayer and really set aside time to
Connect.
get myself to the place where I am living in the moment.
Yeah,
And I'm not elsewhere in my mind,
right. Well, the gift of the present is in the now,
Right.
right? And, yes, the seeds that you're planting today uh, here's what's going to be growing tomorrow. So what kind of seeds are you planting? Are you watering, nurturing them? And so that tomorrow will be a growth that you can greet with open arms. But we've
Yeah.
got to understand that if we choose to live in pain and anguish, now, there isn't anybody that doesn't go through some sort of trauma or struggle in life, right? But we could choose whether we're going to stay there or whether
Right.
we're going to learn from it and discover our own courage and our own strengths. And that goes back to, what are we feeding? Am I feeding
Right.
the pain, the victimization, or am I feeding the illumination that I've got from
Mhm.
it, the discovery that I've got from it? And where you can look, I mean, I've got people who will share stories that you hear that is like, how can any other human being do that to someone?
Right.
How could they even be here talking to us today and have stepped into what they're doing and helping others when
Right.
what was happened to them is because they chose to?
Yeah.
And doesn't mean that
Yeah.
it wasn't difficult. It doesn't mean that they didn't struggle or that they're still not struggling, but they
Hmm.
still choose to feed the possibilities rather than
Right.
the pain and the anguish.
Yeah. For me, one struggle I've had for many years, and I still struggle, is sort of this worldview of radical materialism.
Mm,
You know, I will work out almost every day for my body because my muscles are apparent to me, right?
yes,
I've got muscles, but the mind is a muscle. Is the
yes,
thing that I have trouble remembering and being disciplined about. So when I say, you know, I work out almost every day, I sometimes don't make time to work out the mental muscle
right.
in my head and to get into the place where I can be present and, like you said, watering
Mm,
that, or being in a place where I am growing in presentness
yes,
and being in the present at all times throughout my day. I mean, that is like that seed. That's what I'm doing when I'm doing my mindfulness time.
yeah,
I'm planting that seed and I'm watering it because at some point something amazing and
it's going to
sublime is
grow.
going to happen,
Yes.
and I don't want to miss it, right? I don't
No,
want to miss it. It's a
no.
gift.
If you're not
And
present, it's
so,
gone by. You missed it.
but I have to remember that the mind's a muscle as much as the
Yes.
body has
Yeah.
muscle. And
But so
that's
is the
something I
heart, and
really
so
only,
is the soul, and so is the spirit. That it all
absolutely.
has its
Yeah.
intellect, and we have to include it in the conversation, right?
Yes. Mhm.
Yeah. And I think
Absolutely.
this is the thing. It's very easy. You know, I'm in Canada, you're in America, but it's very easy to get caught up in the expectation and these shoulds and you have to of life that's being given to us. And we know when we've stepped out of it and we look at life from the outside in, we go, no, everybody's envious of these North
Hmm.
American countries where everybody can have everything. But don't you realize you already have everything? It's within you. And
Yeah.
when you embrace the heart, soul, and spirit of you, and that Gus, God, universe, spirit, or energy, whatever you wish to call it, coming through you, you'll realize that, you know, you're a divine spirit having a human experience. So when you put the two together, that human experience can be extraordinary, even in its
Right.
struggles. And this
Hmm.
easy way out of buying us happiness has left
Hmm.
us empty and wanton. And we have, it's like somebody, a nutritionist once saying, it doesn't matter if a person's 300 pounds, they could still die from malnutrition.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, you know,
Absolutely.
malnutrition of the soul and the heart and the spirit, because we're so busy feeding the expectation that more, more, more will make us happy instead of
Right.
that connection to the abundance that's already within.
Absolutely. And that's the power of having a sort of international experience.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
Again, you strip away all the pretense, all the
Yeah.
cultural sort of um, trappings,
Mm.
and you say, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to to be in community? What does it mean to succeed? What does growth mean? I mean,
Yeah.
when you take out yourself outside of the context of your own culture, um, you're going to find some things transfer to
Yeah.
humans across the globe and
Yes.
other things don't. And I'm not saying those things aren't good or fine for our culture, but you'll know what your priorities are at that
Yes.
point. You know?
And you know, I think that probably the greatest gift you gave yourself was saying yes. I'll go be the beekeeper, even though you like you didn't know anything about it. But that willingness to not let that get in your way. Well, I guess I can learn, right? But
Yeah,
let's go for the experience and look at the gift that it gave you because it reset the way you looked at life and valued life and the way you conduct your life today.
absolutely. Yeah. I've never looked at my starry-eyed naivete as
Mm,
a gift, but I think you're
yeah,
right. It sure was.
yes. And I think that's that willingness to we say that the biggest leap in life is the first step. And to understand that what we can do is put our experience and our wisdom and our skills and tools in our backpack, but walk forward in wonderment of the unknown, not the fear of it.
Yeah.
Because with the experiences and the skills and tools that we've acquired, whatever we meet, we'll know what to do. Right.
Mhm.
But if you're not
Yeah.
willing to be adventurous and walk forward and explore, how are you ever going to discover what really it's all about?
That's right. Yeah. So courage is a big lesson,
Mm.
and maybe a little naivete will help that courage out.
Yeah,
So
because you don't know enough to talk yourself out of it.
exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
And I
Yeah.
think I think that naivete, that innocence, but I think that sense of wonderment. You've got three kids. I've got three kids now and two grandkids. But as I look at the two grandkids, one's 28 months old, and I look at the way he plays and the way he explores and the way he does things, and it's like, he's I just want to know what's going on in your mind. And I'm seeing his eyebrows go up and this conversation that's going on internally in his head. And it's
Yeah.
wonderful to see. And I don't want anybody to come along and say, well, now you've got to conform and go into this box and you can't live in your wonderment anymore because
Right.
grandma's got to keep that wonderment going hell or high water. Because I think that's
Yeah.
America was founded by explorers.
Exactly. And I think the greatest literature connects you with something sublime, something beautiful and beyond yourself.
Yeah,
I think that's um, my wife would say, keep those kids reading books because it
yes,
charges up their imagination
I
and it puts
100%
them in
agree.
a space where they
Explore
can
their own
see wonderful
possibilities.
things.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
can see wonderful things in their own life. Yeah.
Why did you call it white cloud free?
Comes from a 1789 William Blake poem. William Blake was this sort of eccentric poet. I think he was British, and he wrote the Songs of Innocence and Experience. And he's got this wonderful poem called "The Little Black Boy," which encapsulates to me a sort of, and this was 1789, so this was before colonialism was a bad
Yeah,
word. It
right.
was sort of this idea that he was seeing, even in those early days of colonialism, that when the British people were encountering these dark skinned people, it wasn't like we've been talking about, it wasn't just a morally deficient people with a morally superior people. What he was
Uh,
finding was that in a lot of cases, the dark skinned people had a had a had a moral superiority, or not, maybe not a superiority, but they had things to offer in a value and a moral
yeah.
sense
Mm-hmm.
that were unexpected. And it sort of complicated the
Mm-hmm.
view of what they were doing around the world at
Right.
the time. And he just wrote this poem about that.
Do you have it?
And can I read a little
You
bit of it? My
please.
favorite stanzas?
Yes.
Okay. So this is my favorite line. I'll start with my favorite line. Um, and we are put on earth a little space that we may learn to bear the beams of love. Man, I love bear that. I love that line. Okay, but I'll go on. And these black bodies and this sunburnt face is but a cloud and like a shady grove. For when our souls have learned the heat to bear, the cloud will vanish. We shall hear his voice saying, "Come out from the grove, my love and care, and round my golden tent like lambs rejoice." Thus did my mother say and kiss me, and thus I say to a little English boy, when I from black and he from white cloud free, and round the tent of God like lambs we joy. Um, then he goes, this is the conclusion of it. He says, I'll shade him from the heat till he can bear, to lean in joy upon our Father's knee, and then I'll stand and stroke his silver hair and be like him, and he will then love me. And it's just, to me, it's a poem about my experience in Paraguay
Mm.
with a semi-homeless 12-year-old boy who profoundly affected my life.
Yeah.
And I found it, discovered it one day, and I said, gosh, William Blake in 1789 is writing about my life. It's
Right.
amazing.
Well,
Hmm.
in a lot of ways, although you came over with your intellect and your North American perception, what you met was much like, that poem of the unexpected. And it wasn't you bringing your wisdom, it was you learning wisdom.
Right.
And that when put together, really
And
then
sharing.
transcends.
Yeah.
Yes,
And
exactly.
sharing. I mean, my little friend Eden, who I write a little bit about um, in the novel, he loved Eric Clapton and Tupac Shakur, and he loved uh, he loved Chuck Norris, and he loved Baywatch. He loved American things,
Yes.
and would say, "Oh, do you know Chuck Norris?" And I'm like, "No, no, I don't know Chuck Norris. I'm sorry to inform you." But he
Had a simplicity of
together
joy. Yeah,
together our relationship, we 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 drew from a wisdom that was outside of ourselves.
right.
Together we drew from that wisdom, and it's sort of what the novel's about, drawing
Yeah,
from that wisdom.
yes.
Mhm.
Well, thank you for writing such a book because it is certainly needed. And yes, one can hear the adventurism, etc., of the story, but the depth of really what it's all about is connection. And where does true connection come from? It's when the heart and soul is ignited, when we share the
Yes,
spirit. And that's where we
yes.
truly see the real enrichment, the real e-commerce of life. That's where we see the true value of the meaning of life is in that connection, no matter where it is. And if we can
Yes.
get out of this facade and illusion that more
Hmm.
is more and go back to that humility from heart and soul and
Hmm.
look at each other from the inside out, I think we're truly, really see the abundance where it really lies. And it's not in
Hmm.
the bank account.
Yes, absolutely.
So, how do people get hold of your book and how do they get hold of you?
So the easiest way to do both is to go to petermichaeljohnson.com. That's my website, and I've got links to all the places where you can buy the book. The easiest place appears to be barnesandnoble.com right now. So you can go to barnesandnoble.com. There's an ebook, there's a paperback that's available. Amazon has been touch and go. So sometimes it's on Amazon, sometimes it shows that it's unavailable, and I'm not exactly sure why that is.
Weird,
And I've got a
yes.
few other sites, Apple Books and others, where it's available as well. And then you can also get in touch with me through my website as well. There's a way you can contact me through the website, and you can see some more of my writing. And I'll probably post this interview up there and other interviews that I have. So yeah, so it's a way to keep in touch with me and figure out where to purchase my book.
Wonderful. And of course, you're on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok under Pete.Michael Johnson and under TikTok, Peter Johnson 5533. So people can get hold, watch you, follow you there. And I think,
Absolutely.
it's wonderful. Really, it's the moral of the story where really it is about true connection, true value of life, comes from the inside out. And it doesn't matter what the intellect knows. How can the intellect empower somebody else true core and true value of who they are? How can it help them have a better life? And it isn't about lording over the knowledge. I'm more superior
Yes.
because I have this education and you don't. Well, I have the education of life. I have the
Right.
education of land and sky.
Hmm.
And if we're willing, I think the best teachers are those that learn from their students. And
Hmm.
if we're willing to learn from one another instead of this illusional of hierarchy, we then truly can see the possibilities and the opportunities where things can grow that benefit everyone.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, that's great. That's it.
Thank you so much, Peter. It's been absolutely great, and thank you for taking your story. I think this is, people put their kids in the army or the navy, or they go and do that to have that travel in life, but the Peace Corps is a whole different, but just saying, yes, why not? Why not? Let's go be
Yes.
a beekeeper. Why not? And I think that more and more, and I think this generation more and more is um, kind of looking for some sort of meaning and some sort of reason of value would make sense out of life. And I think doing this type of thing is the kind of thing that could really bring them home to really what matters. right?
Well, I'm very grateful for you having me on your program, and this has been a true pleasure for me. And I agree, Peace Corps is a great experience. It's not for everybody.
Right.
You know, you have to live a little rough sometimes, but if you're open to new experiences and and want to find some deeper meaning and deeper connections, it's a great way to do that.
Yeah, exactly. And if not that, find something else. But be willing to step out of your comfort zone and think this is all, and be willing to take that soul, heart, spirit journey, because that's truly where the meaning of life is. So thank you so much, Peter. And to everyone else out there, we'll catch you next time. We hope that you enjoyed the show. There are so many more for you here on selfdiscoverywisdom.com. Just go to the podcast tab at the top there and you will see all the many genres and all 3,000 shows ready for your listening. We are here to serve you, to help you on your journey of life, and we know that through inspiration it begets invitation. We are supported by you, the listeners, and those that we interview. Anything that you can spare us in donation would be greatly accepted, and we do hope that you enjoy the next show.